Thank you very much. We are here to talk about whether technology, business, and journalism can mix and be a success. Obviously, tons of people are reading everything online. Online has won, but can businesses still make money? Can journalists still have a unique voice, or are they being overwhelmed? And what exactly can people who are trying to engage with the media from a variety of perspectives learn from what these people here are experiencing? So up here we've got Kelly Clay, who is she's with Forbes and also a digital communication strategist. Brier Dudley, the tech columnist for the Seattle Times. Chris Kornelis, freelance writer. And John Cook, founder of GeekWire. So I wanted to kick it off really quickly, and I was going to pick on John at first just because John really was an early adapter in the online space. John and I worked at the old Seattle Post-Intelligencer, a victim of the online space. The newspaper is no longer with us. But John really was one of the first evangelists trying to get very hidebound journalists to go online and to embrace it. And I would be curious what his experience has been these past few years, and also recognizing that increasingly it's very difficult to make money on advertising. Even Google now is starting to sell banner ads within search space. Everybody's getting their information from cell phones. No one wants to see ads. I guess the question I'd put first to John is it time to really just recognize that perhaps online advertising is not the way to go or to rely on if you want to have a profitable business model for journalism?
Yeah, I mean, I can dig into that. That's a weighty question to start with, but I think absolutely you have to have a diverse revenue base if you want to build a media company these days, and that's what we're attempting to do at GeekWire, and we are doing. And I think you see that in our model, in that we have, yes, traditional advertising on the site, but we also have annual sponsors and sponsors that come on and support us. We have a big event business. We'll do about a dozen events this year. And we also have a marketplace called GeekWork, which is basically a jobs marketplace where people can find talent, source talent. That's a new business line for us. And we're looking at new things that we're looking to expand into. For me, journalism is in our DNA. It's the root of what we do. But we want to have these various tentacles that are basically off the main head of what we're doing, and I think that's the way you have to build a business in the media landscape these days, is to have multiple revenue streams, move quickly, pivot when something is not working, and try new things. And so that's the model that we've been rolling out at GeekWire over the last 2.5 years. We're just coming up into our third year, and we're cash flow positive, we're lean and mean, and we are hoping to build a bigger enterprise going into 2014.
Brier, I'd be curious about your perspective at the Seattle Times. You've got obviously the largest newspaper in Washington State. You have a very well-read website. You guys recently instituted a paywall. What's the view like from where you sit in terms of journalism as a business from inside the Seattle Times, and your observations of other local media?
Well, I sit facing a wall, so I don't. The view from my seat is a little bit dreary. But the paper itself is doing better than expected. In fact, we switched to the paywall, and it's well ahead of our projections. I wouldn't say that it's making us super profitable or anything like that. I'm not going to get into numbers. We don't really talk about that because we're still a privately held company. But if you look broadly at the newspaper industry, we're all shifting to paywalls, and it's worked. The New York Times is the flagship for that, and it's convinced people that it's time to start paying. That's also had a negative effect on advertising, though, because you put up the paywall, your circulation goes down. So everybody's tinkering with the balance, trying to figure out how much, if I figure out the mix there, I think about 65% of the newspaper business is still funded by advertising. It's like $35 billion a year, so it's a huge piece of the pie. Hard to walk away from that. I kind of think about Microsoft. It's got Windows, PC business still there, still an enormously profitable business. But mobile devices are, maybe the future of how people are going to be doing computing. At what point do you walk away and shift your focus? When billions of dollars are still coming in every month, it's hard to give that up and start turning the ship toward the new thing. And I think that's where we are.
Kelly and Chris, you guys come at this from a slightly different perspective. I think people who are trying to make money in journalism right now are faced with the reality that what publications and websites and others are willing to pay is going down. I mean, 10, 15 years ago, if you were to get an article in a national newspaper, freelance article, or a magazine, you'd be talking about a payout of thousands of dollars. Now, for even very, very prominent publications and websites, the pay is a fraction of that, if it's anything at all. I mean, what has your experience been? Is it getting harder to make money?
It really depends on the type of article you write. Depends on if you're the first one to write the article. As a freelancer at Forbes, I'm competing with hundreds of other writers to write the exact same thing. It also depends on how deep your analysis goes and how much that reaches others. If I'm writing something really new and unique, that might resonate with many others and that might get shared, but I'm really reliant on the community to amplify my post. If it's not interesting, if it's not unique, it's not going to go anywhere, which means it has no page views, which means I'm not going to get paid. I get paid on page views. And I also get paid by how many visitors I get, returning visitors. So if I don't build that audience, I'm not going to get an income or a check from Forbes. I have an income, but the Forbes is not going to pay me. I don't know what your experience is like.
Chris, what have you seen? Is it harder for you to make money? Is it easier? Is it different? I mean, what are you seeing?
Well, one of the things I like to say, I taught a journalism class at the end of last year at Seattle University, and I used to use John's experience as a good model for what we're doing as journalists. Whether you work within a news organization or out of one, we're all entrepreneurs at this point. And when John was pitching the PI to get his product off the ground, and they dragged their feet. I mean, I consider that to be an example of bad big media here. But at this point, we're all independent contractors, and whether we work inside of a large organization or like myself as a freelancer, we're all entrepreneurs. And even when I worked for Seattle Weekly, I was still looking for different revenue streams. And as a freelancer, we're doing the exact same thing, whether it's teaching a class or whether it's freelancing on the side, whether it's looking at some book deals. Things that come out on paper tend to pay a lot more than things that come out online. But to answer your question, there still is good money that I would consider to be good money for articles. Those typically are the ones that go into print where the money is. But when you talk about publications paying a fraction of what they used to. I know theatlantic.com got into some trouble when they offered to rerun something for free earlier this year, and the guy made a really big deal out of how sad it was that they were doing that. And I looked at it from the completely other direction, which I've written one story for theatlantic.com. The editors were apologetic about the rates they were going to pay me, and I just could care less. I was excited to write the piece. It was so popular that Good Morning America booked me for their show that morning, and then Hurricane Sandy bumped me from the show. And that's not an experience I had ever had somewhere else. So these places like Forbes has been really good for journalists, I think, and theatlantic.com or rollingstone.com, these places that have audiences that those of us who are independent contractors haven't been exposed to before, and it's very valuable, if not extremely lucrative at first.
That segues pretty nicely into this next topic. We talk about technology, we talk about transparency. It's never been easier to read any media. 15 years ago, if you wanted to read The Guardian, you were pretty much out of luck unless you were in New York or Los Angeles or Chicago, and you could pick up an edition of the paper 2 or 3 days later. Now you can read any newspaper, any publication, anytime you want. Journalists have to be aware of what their competitors are doing. They have to follow what's going on. They have to follow what's going on in their beats real time. Like I said, go back to John. Does that get overwhelming? Because we've talked about the need to do original content, to do something that's really going to stand out. But if you're spending a lot of time seeing what everybody else is doing, do you ever feel like you'd just like to be able to turn off the internet for 6 hours and then return to your publication?
Yes.
How do you deal with that? I mean, you and your partner Todd Bishop. You guys are out there. You are online all the time, and it's really helps you guys. But how do you deal? How do you filter?
I mean, to me, I think it is a personality thing. I've always been a journalist. I've always been a breaking news journalist. I get fired up and I get an adrenaline rush by chasing down a story, and that adrenaline rush is still part of me as a journalist. And I have that, and I had that when things were moving at a slower pace pre-internet, and I have that in the internet era. And so I think anybody that likes being a journalist that gets fired up by that still hasn't, and still finds and actually can use these technologies as tools to dig up and find news stories. And so We do very much pride ourselves on digging and finding stories in addition to just covering the daily news flow of the day. And you just need to make time for it. One example is I will just turn off Twitter. I mean, I go to Twitter and in 5 minutes I've found a story I feel like I want to jump on, and I don't always have time to do it. But when I have gaps to fill, I will jump on there and find stuff that I think is interesting and want to pursue. So I think the balance is making the time for yourself to dig into those stories that really do matter and the stories that you want to pursue. And I think it's just a matter of prioritization and knowing what type of organization you are. At GeekWire, we do want to make sure that we are chasing stories and digging up news and being first, and that's important to us. Other organizations, that's not as important. They want to aggregate other people's content, or they want to just do shorter synopsis. I mean, there are different types of media and different types of journalism that's being produced right now, and people have different strategies on what works and what doesn't work. And but I like our form. I feel sometimes like we might go down with the ship, if you will, that we're still trying to practice, because this is harder to do. It's harder to mine that and to spend the time to dig around and find those stories. But to me, that's the fun part of the job, and I don't want to give that up.
Brier, I remember when I first got into newsrooms, there were old-timers complaining that they'd just taken their typewriters away. As the technology has changed, what has your experience been? Is it information overload, or the flip side is we've never had so much information at our fingertips?
Well, there's different ways of looking at it. The information flow is fantastic. The increase of flow to us and our ability to reach people farther and faster and in different mediums, that's great. As far as the technology that we're using within the building, I've seen the shift. When I first started working in the college newspaper, we'd do the wax layout, and then I set up a desktop publishing system, and away it went. I think that people are excited about that, actually. There's a reputation that older journalists in the newsroom are grumpy about it. I don't know where that comes from, because the people at our paper are very excited about the changes that are happening and very enthusiastic about the new systems we're installing, until they actually get installed and the software sucks, and then we get all frustrated with it. But that's a little bit different. It's actually surprising how much investment old media is still making. Newspaper companies are dropping $5 million, $7 million into these big content management systems to enable this transformation to be better at multi-channel distribution. That has to do, we want to be part of that flow too. We want to be hitting every channel quickly and easily. For instance, we just are in the final gasp of installing this big exotic content management system that's kind of a write once, publish everywhere system. And you guys are probably doing that at AP as well. And it's kind of an exciting time if you look at it from the right angle.
Kelly, not too long ago, if you wrote an article, you were really reliant on where it was placed in a newspaper or a magazine, and if people either saw it or they didn't. And after the day of publication, that was it. It was the next day's fish wrapper. Now journalists can really promote their own work. Have you found that to be a real boon, in being able to have this link that you can promote on so many different platforms?
It's helpful in the sense that I have my own community, so that I have about 9,000 followers on Twitter. I have a following of about 4,000 on Facebook. I know to put it on Reddit, Stumble Upon. I can get the initial push out there, but I'm really reliant on those who follow me to help make it more viral. And so I can only do so much. But I found is that by building that community, that audience that really is engaged with my content again and again and again is very helpful. But to go back to your point about the noise, it is really noisy out there. And the lifetime of a tweet is, like a couple seconds? It's going to go through my followers' stream so fast that they can't consume that news. And a lot of my followers are going to miss it. So I'm really reliant on a really fresh piece of content to stick around and make sure that goes viral. So whereas GeekWire might be breaking news, I'm not chasing after the news in the same way. I'm hoping that my content is more analytical. I write things that are 2-3 hours after the fact, maybe even a couple days, so that I hope that content has a greater length and is not just going to be a flash in the pan, and that helps it stay on Twitter longer.
Hey, do you mind my asking, if we jump back just a second, I've been curious since you mentioned that your compensation is based on your traffic.
Mm-hmm.
How does that affect your story selection? And how do you think that's affecting your news judgment if you're looking for the heat?
So that's actually a really good question. So a while ago, I used to write a lot more about Microsoft, Starbucks, publicly traded companies. The way Forbes works is it actually gets stories that, if I tag it right, will get into the ticker on Yahoo's stock ticker. What I found actually is that those stories also get a quick punch, maybe 1,000 page views, really not a lot. But what actually my most viral articles are those that have maybe some SEO value or maybe some social value. My most popular posts are those that I've analyzed what happened to Amy's Baking Company when they had that social media breakdown. I don't know if you guys remember that. I've written about GoDaddy and how they've had some cultural mishaps. I write about things that kind of maybe will stick around for a long while or maybe have some SEO juice to them so that they'll get searched for even 6-7 months after the fact. And then I'll keep getting page views on those month after month after month.
Chris, you've done quite a bit of entertainment writing. How has this this online world where some people, you're searching for clicks, you're searching for attention, has that affected what you write or what you'll pitch, or how has that affected your day-to-day life?
Not so much. I mean, there have been times in my life when it has. I mean, if you're writing 6 blog posts a day or if you're editing 12 blog posts a day, we all know there are certain words and keywords that look better to people who click on things than those that don't. But what is universal across any medium is that if you have something your audience wants that nobody else has, they will promote it for you and they will spread the word. If you have a piece of news or information that is unique, that is what is popular, if it's something your audience wants. And just to kind of go back to what you were talking about, the information overload, I think as far as what I participate in social media and gathering, my news gathering operation, I guess you could say I have my things that I do, and some other people do theirs that are completely different. And I think the mistake would be for everybody to say, well, we all have to be doing Twitter really well. We all have to be doing Facebook really well. Some people are better on other mediums than others. And I think back to I don't know if anybody else saw the Parks and Rec writing crew give a talk at Bumbershoot this year, which I thought was just hysterical. Of the 7 or 8 of them that were on stage, one of them got their job because they had a great Twitter feed that the producers liked. 2 of them weren't on any social media at all. And so does that make any sense to what we're talking about? Doing the thing that you do well, but not feeling like you have to spread yourself so thin is where I'm at right now.
I think that as we talk about information overload for journalists, I know a lot of people get frustrated trying to get the media's attention. There's more media than ever, but for certain people in the PR industry or government officials or from many different business sectors, they're banging their head against the wall trying to get the media's attention. And I think we were talking about this before we came up here. We get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of unsolicited emails every day. And I think that I was going to ask John, I mean, people look for advice about how to get the media's attention. Well, it's hard, and I think we joke that we don't want to talk to you except when we want to talk to you, then we want to talk to you right away. How do you, how do you deal with it? What's your filter?
That question always has baffled me. How do you get the media's attention? I just don't always get, oftentimes you don't want our attention. Because we're digging up stories and we're looking through court records or SEC filings, and we're trying to get our questions answered as it relates to other things. That said, there are occasions when you are writing a feature story or what have you, but the pitch to the PR professional, to the journalist, is really, really, in my view, just completely overrated, and is just distracting and more of that clutter that I have to filter through on a daily basis. I think having news, first off, is important. So if there is a news event, then how do you define what a news event is? So it's different to each different reporter that's probably up here. So you got to know what each individual reporter is interested in, and then figure out whether this is newsworthy enough to go to them, to send to them, so that they can actually consume it. But I don't know. The endless pitches of people that I get from Sarasota, Florida, that are pitching me on some telephony product that there is absolutely zero chance that I would ever potentially cover. It is endless, and I think it's just a problem with the PR industry that they don't have the tools to figure out who they should be pitching this to, or it's just a shotgun approach and hopefully they think something hits. But yeah, there's a lot of clutter out there.
Kelly, you said something interesting before we came up here that you were less likely to notice an email, but if someone tweeted at you, you would at least probably notice that.
Yeah, so I have a full-time job at HasOffers, and before my day even starts, I wake up to over 200 emails from PR firms from the East Coast. I don't have time to read all those. I'm going to delete every single one of them. Throughout the day, I receive hundreds of more emails, and unless they're work-related, I'm probably not going to read those pitches. But what I will notice, and what I will read all of them, are my @mentions on Twitter. And it's because I receive quite a few, but I'm going to read all of them because they're interactions with friends and colleagues. So startups, companies who pitch me or contact me via Twitter are likely to get my attention because I'm actually going to read that. And if you link me to a blog post that is your news of the day, I'm likely going to go to the blog, I'm going to read it, and then I can decide if that's worth actually writing a story about. And that actually leads to a good point that if you actually have a pitch, it should be a story. It shouldn't be just a press release about a product. You should have a story to tell, and that story should already be up somewhere that I can read it and then decide for myself whether I want to follow up with you about it. And then I can figure out my own way to contact you, and it's already via Twitter, so I can send you a DM, then follow up via email. And I'm going to notice that.
Chris, you were talking about perhaps some suggestions you might have for folks trying to pitch something, things that you've seen that were effective, and also things that you'd want to read or even maybe want to write about.
Yeah, well, I mean, the clutter that John was talking about and that we both have been talking about is very real. And I stopped seeing subject lines, but I get the same, I get a dozen emails from the same PR firm in a day, and I start to check out of that. I pretty much know what it's going to be. If I get 12 emails from you a day, then I'm not going to read any of them. If you're more selective in your pitches and you're not taking the shotgun approach and you really are actually addressing an email to me because you know what I write about, you know what region of the country I am, and the possibility that something, if I'm the right person for you to be pitching, then it's very apparent and I may actually read it. But the other thing we were talking about earlier is that I write a lot about bands, and we could take us to any industry. First of all, every band has a new record, every band has a new sound, and every band is going on tour. None of that is interesting to me. I've written, every music journalist has written 1,700 of those profile stories. If the band is worth writing about, they must be part of something bigger than themselves. Pitch that story to me. Pitch me a trend story. Find something that this company or this band is a part of that's interesting, and it might not be a 4,000-word profile of your client, but if your client is part of something bigger than themselves, that is something that's interesting to me, and I'd be more interested in at least reading that email.
And one other tip there I would say is, I wouldn't have the PR people pitching. I mean, oftentimes the best pitches to me come in through the entrepreneur, the founder, the CEO, the venture capitalist. I was at an event, at our Startup Day event last Friday, and a venture capitalist, he's involved in a company here in town by the name of Rover.com, pitched me a great story. And he's like, our PR firm isn't getting this out. And I was like, what's the story? And he went on to tell me this great idea on this person who's involved in their service, who quit their day job as now being a full-time pet sitter through their service. And I was like, this is a good story. Yeah, and we'll pursue it. So it's essentially cutting out the middleman. I mean, the best person that can tell your story is you, the entrepreneur, the CEO, the founder. Now, I know at a certain level and a certain stage, you get to a point where the company's too big to do that. But certainly, and I primarily cover startups and earlier stage tech companies, at that stage, let's say under 50 employees, having a PR person in the middle is actually problematic in my view. Over 50, I think you can certainly make the case. And PR can be doing stuff advantageous in other ways and helping you build your brand or helping you in social media or what have you. But in terms of the pitch to the journalists, it's a relationship, and I would suggest it's good to have that rapport and relationship with the journalists, and that's going to serve it. And you might not get hooked every time. It might take 3 or 4 or 5 times, and it might take coming out to 3 or 4 events to meet somebody, but then it resonates and it connects, and the story's there, and you jump on it.
Brier's the Seattle Times tech guy. You must be inundated with pitches. What catches your eye? What doesn't? What say you?
Well, that's a moving target. I mean, it's always, I do get tons and tons of incoming stuff, and I'm happy to get it. It's fine. Email's better. You know, phone call, relationships with people I know is helpful. I think, though, a bigger concern than inundation is actually not hearing at all about things that are happening. And I think about that particularly as we look at some of the bigger companies that have built up their own owned media presence, and that's such a big emphasis now. You know, you take a Microsoft, for instance, you know, they've pretty much built their own news organization. It's probably bigger than your news organization at this point, to, you know, report the story, present the story, distribute the story, and they can hit all the channels that we can hit for distribution. And you know, their readership is probably bigger than, you know, Forbes readership. Just to say Xbox, you know, they set up the Xbox newsroom. It's sort of like an online newspaper for Xbox stuff, and they write articles, and, you know, they have reporters reporting on what's going on. It's completely unfiltered. It's the story they want. It's kind of a, you know, black belt PR. But you know, as traditional media metrics look worse, and if you're just looking at the metric side, and the reach of these PR efforts looks bigger, you know, I wonder if we'll get cut off altogether eventually. It's something I think about a lot.
Yeah, you really see that in sports too. I mean, you see like the Sounders or the Seahawks have essentially become their own media
MLB.com.
powerhouses. Yeah, MLB.
Chris, can I just throw a little anecdote out, just to reaffirm what John was saying about reaching out yourself? I actually think that, you know, particularly bands, people started calling a few journalists themselves would get a lot better reaction. One case in particular, there was a particular artist that was being pitched to me repeatedly, and I had showed some interest in this aspect of this story, kept getting pitched, but I wasn't responding. But then Kenny G sent the email himself, and I responded instantly, and was, you know, humbled by the fact that he would actually email himself, and it ended up being a really fun story.
We'll open this up to questions in just a second. I wanted to ask one last question and go around the panel here. I think as we walk around this conference, you see everyone staring at their phone, and that's how they get all their information, email, content, everything. And I know in newsrooms around the country, people are trying to figure out how they tailor content for small screens that are getting smaller, and increasingly people have a lot of clutter. How much of that consideration is factoring into the stories you're writing, into your newsrooms? John, I'd start with you. When you guys at GeekWire are delivering your content now, how much attention are you focusing on mobile? And is there always the worry that, you know, maybe 5 years from now it won't be mobile, it'll be a chip in the head? I mean, how do you keep up with this? The platform changes so quickly. I mean, how much of that goes into your thinking?
At the end of the day, I don't think about it too much, frankly. I'm with Chris on this. I think getting to the story first and producing good quality content will find its audience, whether the people are reading on a mobile, a desktop computer, or Google Glass. You know, people are going to find it, and it will get spread. And so this is where I'm going back to my, you know, die-on-the-wool days of an old-time journalist, and it's in our DNA. We can't change that culture of GeekWire. You know, it's who Todd Bishop, my co-founder, and I are. I mean, that's what we like, that's what we are about, that's what we're going to do. And so for us, we're very much driven by that purpose to find very interesting, compelling stories and tell them in the best way we can. That can be news, that can be a feature, that can be a profile, that can be digging through court records, that can be digging through SEC filings, whatever. And we do across the board of that. But we want to be the best at those types of stories in the niche that we're covering. And at the end of the day, I don't care what platform it gets delivered through.
We'll go down the line here. Chris.
You know, I've been doing some copywriting since I left the Weekly in May, but one of the things that we will write would be like the subject line for an email. And this is the first time I've actually considered, oh God, if I'm reading this on my iPhone, there's only a certain number of characters I'm going to get in there. And so, you know, surprisingly, every news organization is not only still doing emails, but they're actually making money on their emails. So that's like something I've been giving more consideration to. But to that point, though, I mean, there's still when you're sending something out on Twitter, it's a different headline, quote unquote, than you would put in a different medium, whether you're at somebody or using a hashtag or whatnot. So it does factor in a little bit, but like John was saying, that's secondary to having something that your audience wants.
Brier, newspapers, we used to just be concerned about column inches. Would the story fit into the allotted space, and would headlines take too much away from the inch count you were given? Have you found these new technologies freeing? What has your experience been? And do you think a lot about the platform as you're writing?
I don't think about the platform much. The news organization does think about the platform a lot. I think that we're finally getting to the point where we can offer a really good multi-screen experience. If you look at digital, to be a successful big digital media company, you have to meet consumers' expectations, which were set by Netflix and even Kindle, which is you buy it once, you can consume it on all of your devices at any time, any place, however you want for the optimal screen at that moment. So if you're a Netflix subscriber, you expect that for your $8 a month, if you're on a long bus ride, you can take out your phone and catch up on something. Or better than if you're at home, you want to watch it on the big screen. Now, news is that way. We're just getting that way. We've got, apps, everything, every platform, you can get your news. You can get it on your phone if you need to. Some people prefer that. I still think that the optimal medium for news is a broadsheet newspaper. If you want to, you have a photo, you can skim and scan 40 different stories at once and decide which one's of interest. And if it's interesting enough, then you'll keep going and you'll flip through to the jump and stuff like that. And, maybe digital first folks don't think that, but still there's, tens of millions of people that are paying a lot of money for that medium, and that'll still be the primary, the best target for my stories going forward.
Kelly.
There's a huge shift in the primary device from desktop to mobile. I think that it's predicted by the end of 2014, more people will be using mobile instead of desktop. And so I really think about my stories in a way that they're not going to be so long that the person will stop reading halfway through. I make sure that it's not too short, that it doesn't have enough analysis, but I really primarily think about the way it's shared. So I'm making sure it's being shared via every channel possible, especially the ones that are consumed primarily via mobile, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit to some extent. And so back to Chris's point, I'm very cognizant of the headline so that it's very clickable, it's tweetable. People are going to want to click on it and then also share it as well. A lot of people share headlines without reading it, which isn't great for my story, but it can help it go viral. So I really think about that. And so as we move to mobile, I'm really aware that people are going to want to be able to consume it and consume it quickly.
I guess we'd open up for questions at this point. If anybody has anything they want to ask of our panel, come on up.
This would be a good time to pitch stories since we're not getting very many right now. Right, John?
I'll see how many are in my email when I get back.
So I'm curious, Kelly, just real quick, how much click-through are you getting on your Twitter stories? How do you measure that, and what do you think the ROI is on the time you spend tweeting and pushing it out through that channel?
I spend about 2 seconds pushing it out through all the channels. On the sidebar of my Forbes articles, there's all the social channels, and I just go through and just G+ it, tweet it out, share it via Facebook. It takes actually probably about a minute or two. And then I watch the numbers go up. On a story I did today, it's not getting much traction, just probably because it's not that interesting. They're hit or miss. They are really hit or miss. I did a story on Facebook privacy in teenagers a couple weeks ago, and it took off. I had no idea. And then I did a story on a new, John wrote it too earlier today, Starbucks implemented a way that you can now tweet out a gift card. You could send a gift card via Twitter. And I thought it would take off. It's had like 600 page views, and it's just gone nowhere. So things like that, it's measuring the ROI. It's really depending upon my audience and how viral the story goes. And
that's a really good point, though, Kelly. I mean, at the end of the day, I've been doing this a long time. Brier's been doing this a long time, and I'm sure he'll say the same. You really don't know what story is going to take off at the end of the day. I've reported out some really interesting stories that I think are just going to kill it, and they just get, they just don't get any traffic. And so at the end of the day, I think it is important just to be driven by the story and try to be driven by that at the end of the day and not be so consumed by the page views, because it is like throwing darts sometimes. You'd be really surprised at what some of the top stories on GeekWire are at the end of the day. It's weird stuff. It's stuff like we sometimes throw up in 10 minutes, and it's like the #1 story on the site, and we're like, God, I was like, Todd and I both have had this experience. Like, I was 3 minutes from not doing that story, and it like gets 100,000 page views. It's crazy. So I don't know. I've stopped trying to figure that out and just try to focus on what I want to cover and what we should be covering as a news organization.
We've got a question right here. If you could actually go to the mic. He actually raised his hand first, and we'll go right to the folks at the mic.
My question is, traditionally, news media has covered more negative news than positive. If I save someone, no one's going to cover me, but if I kill someone, everyone wants to cover me.
Everyone wrote about Cory Booker.
All right, so now it gets even more scarier that your compensation model, Kelly, as you pointed out, it's kind of variable compensation based on the hits and retweets and everything else. So I think that incentive model is not aligned to the goodness. So what do you think? How does it change your society? Because you are chasing all those hits and chasing all those views.
I would jump in real quick.
Yeah.
Just I work for the Associated Press, which is a mass market news agency, and I don't think that aspect of the media is not causing that. It's reflecting society. It's kind of how we are. People don't talk about things that go well. If you hang out with your friends in the office water cooler, you talk about things that go poorly. Right. And I think that it depends on the media and how they cover it, but we tend as a people to see the glasses half empty. I mean, I'd be curious what my fellow
And I would say that hasn't changed in decades. I mean, if you go back through history, I mean, media has not traditionally focused on the positive, uplifting
It's actually gotten
stories.
tamer.
I actually think it has gotten better to some degree, that there is more of an appetite for that. And I would say that you see that reflected in a lot of different news agencies. I mean, speaking of our own, like we do some lighter feature type stories. I mean, to me, at the end of the day, what you want to do is you want to have a well-rounded media property, and you do want to dig into the stories that might be considered negative or bad news, but you want to have a mix. And at the end of the day, we want to kind of surprise people that come back to our site and have that mix of hard news, feature, and just across the board. But I don't think that's really changed that much over the years. I mean, I guess the bad news, yeah, if somebody's stealing money or if a stock has tanked 80%, that gets covered. Yeah, absolutely.
It's also not
and it
news.
should be covered, frankly.
And it's also not news when your house doesn't burn down. We expect that your house will still be standing in the morning, but it burns down. We write about it. And I'd actually argue that a newspaper, if you pick up the Seattle Times today, I would guess 70% of it's going to be positive things, whether it's sports, whether it's arts and entertainment, television. We don't think of it the same way, but newspapers are extremely soft.
Well, if you look at, I won't name names, but there a certain newspaper that went all online recently, and so now it is living and dying by that traffic. And so I don't know if you think it's positive or not, but I think probably the most clicks go to like the 75 screen slideshow of the Brazilian bikini contest. So I don't know if that's positive or negative. I think it's kind of negative and misogynistic, but it's not. They're not chasing ambulance traditionally.
And tech news has always been generally a little bit more positive, but we're very analytical. I mean, for every story you're going to see a story that offers the other side of it a little bit. And I think, you see stories about funding, and then there's, well, what's going to happen to this? It's not all negative headlines, but the stories are going to be very fair. And if they're not fair, then it's TechCrunch.
The top story when I left today was the power line. Did you guys hear about this? A backhoe backed into a power line on Denny going up toward Capitol Hill, and this super high voltage power line fell down on 3 dump trucks with guys in the dump trucks. Now you might think that's negative traditional newspaper news, but actually it's positive because none of them actually died. They all survived. The road was closed, so it was negative from that perspective, and more broadly it was positive because you weren't in the truck.
So I'm curious about, at a time like you've talked about where an individual writer can amass a following, and the most important thing to the writer is how their followers project their stories. what's the value add of the publication agency to the writer when all of a sudden we have direct access to writers that don't have to be associated with large publication agencies?
Health insurance.
Well, I would say, I would just use myself as an example. I have a very beloved family member who is in his upper 90s, who recently was alarmed and told his entire family that Barack Obama had named November National Muslim Month and all these bad things. And he said, what is going on here? And credibility is still a big part of what we do. And it's up to the consumers to be mindful of that credibility. And I think that regardless of what you think of the New York Times or the Washington Post or GeekWire, I think that there is or the Associated Press, there is a credibility there that doesn't exist with, Bob's Sled and blog.
I think it's a two-way street too. You're now seeing this rise of very prominent individual brands. Nate Silver's a great example. He built his brand in the 08 election cycle. He went to the New York Times. I think both the New York Times and Nate Silver benefited from that association. He's now gone on to ESPN because he's such a powerful brand. But David Carr, the very famous media writer for the New York Times, he has a funny line. He says, my last name is New York Times. You take New York Times away from David Carr, and he's not nearly as powerful. He's his own brand, he's his own voice. But you're seeing, I think, the rise of individual voices. But both the publication and the writers can be mutually beneficial, I guess is what I'm saying.
I started building my brand writing for Chris Pearl at Locker Gnome 3.5 years ago, but. And now as a freelancer, didn't have any benefits. Again, with Forbes, freelancer, no benefits. And the reason I have a full-time job is I really believe in what HasOffers does. But also, like you said, there's no benefits. And having the credibility of Forbes behind me has helped amplify my personal brand, which has helped amplify what else I do in my career. And without that credibility behind me, I would not be where I'm at. So aligning yourself with a bigger name, if you can do a great deal for yourself. But it's getting to that point where you can get to that brand and having that brand behind you. And it's kind of chicken and the egg. Like, how do you get your brand without having that publication behind you?
I think the real competition isn't so much for eyeballs. You can go out here and hear all about SEO, SEM, that sort of thing, and chasing those eyeballs. It's really time for me. I think, how much time are you going to spend with my stuff or with the Seattle Times this week? And it's so hard with the proliferation of voices out there that people need a service that compiles the news, in an easy way that they can, let's say you have half an hour a day for news. You can go around and you can assemble all these different voices and build your own virtual newspaper, and that's cool, that's fine. But a lot of people want the executive briefing that we provide, and it's worth the money for them to have that executive briefing. And so then it's also a positive for me and other reporters because we're providing a service that people are paying for that gives us the luxury to not have to hustle every single day for every single click. Then we can start writing stories that might not be popular, that might not be trending, because that we have an insulation layer between the metrics and what we do, and we can make news judgments independent of the metrics, which I think is important for society, democracy, things like that. Just for instance, I was coming in here today. There was a tweet I noticed from the guy at Channel 13, and he was responding to people saying, "Hey, I know you guys really wish we covered the Sounders more." Now, I think this is not a democracy example, but he said, when we started talking about the Sounders on our show, our traffic dropped by 53%. So that's why we don't cover the Sounders very much on Channel 13. So, they are losing that insulation layer between maybe what's important for them to cover, and what the numbers are telling them to cover. And so the big organizations hopefully will continue to have that insulation layer. And maybe the voices, the brands will subsume the organization, but I think it's a good thing.
Thanks.
Hello, I wonder if you can discuss how the technology and the shift to online has impacted long-form journalism and investigative journalism in particular. I know when I started writing back in the 90s, it was very common to get a 3,000 to 15,000 word article. You really could delve seriously into depth. Now you're lucky if you get even 1,200 words, and it's limiting, even when you do a lot of hyperlinking and so forth, there's a limit to what you really can honestly cover and how much into depth, and I'm also aware the audience has less attention span to wanting to go into the issues in depth, but some issues require the long form. I know there's a publication long form and a few other outlets, but it seems like we're missing on this long form investigative journalism that used to be a hallmark of the tradition.
Well, I would say, I mean, that is more user-driven than company-driven. I mean, I used to argue for. We were talking earlier about. I would ask my writers to send me 50-word album reviews because I don't think the world needs another 250-word review. But even I think we're entering good times for long-form journalism. The fact that anybody can publish a book. At any length on Amazon is extremely positive. And the fact that anybody can publish an article of any length on their blog is also a great thing.
Yeah, I see a lot of examples of long-form journalism, as Chris was saying. And I think there's also just a new way of telling those stories as well through the online channel. There have been several examples of stories that we've done at GeekWire that might not be 3,500 word stories, but I think in covering the issue and in covering the story as it develops in shorter bursts, you're going to get that package of really what's happening in depth on this scandal or whatever it happens to be that we're covering. So I think cumulatively you'll get that. I think it is up to the journalist at the end of the day to step back on occasion and put things into perspective and to do that as a service to the reader. But I agree with Chris. I think there are plenty of examples out there of long-form journalism.
I think we have a mix. You know, I've been at the Times for a long time, and I remember 15 years ago, people said, oh, nobody has time, write shorter, write shorter, write shorter. And then it's like, oh no, we need to build our brand, unique, great stories, write long-form journalism. So we're always swinging back and forth. But I think the result is you get a blend, and we try to continue providing a blend. The challenge is, though, that as the revenue dwindles and subscriptions dwindle, there are just fewer people to do, and less time to produce that kind of journalism you're talking about.
There's a fair number of people on the Forbes staff who actually write for the magazine, and you'll see every few weeks this story was featured in the whatever day publication of Forbes, and it's a pretty long story. It goes on for a few pages online, and that is the epitome of long-form journalism. But it's the Forbes staff who are paid a salary. They're not worried about page views. Forbes worries about that separately, but it's the magazine that drives that revenue, and they're driven by advertising and sponsors, just like any other publication is. And so you still find that online, but it's a different type of writer that's writing that, and they have a different amount of time to write that article. So you can still find it.
So what are your thoughts on the kind of push recently to define a journalist? Like, this person has the legal protections of being a journalist and their sources could be protected. These people are being left out even though they're part of an open forum that's on the internet. You saw a lot of that with the NSA stuff, like whereas when the Snowden was kind of like pushed out, Greenwald was called a blogger by a couple of critics. Sorry, I'm a nervous person, so I talk like this when I'm in front of a lot of people. But
one thing I would say real quickly is that is a big debate right now, because the thing the internet does, it has just, everybody's a journalist now. I think it's taking a little bit while for society to catch up to that, because what's a journalist? At its base, it's someone who observes something and tells people about it. And you're all journalists if you've got a cell phone. You see something, you send a picture out. I think what you're seeing with the internet is just this incredible democratization of information, and there are good things and there are bad things about it. The one thing I also would kind of point out too is that I think a lot of us who've worked for newspapers know too, there never have been a ton of real protections for journalists. There's the First Amendment, and there are some states have shield laws, but basically the rights that journalists have are not that much different than any citizen. So I think what you're seeing is the technology has rushed past what the legal framework and even the societal framework is, and I think you're seeing that debate play out right now. I don't know how it's going to ultimately play out, but I think it's healthy. Things keep changing so quickly. It's the case law hasn't caught up with it, and frankly, society hasn't caught up with it. People still, to a certain extent, think a journalist is someone like Walter Cronkite who comes on the TV and speaks with this authoritarian voice. Well, even within the traditional media, there's a huge range. There's just a tremendous range. And I think you're just seeing kind of a messy conversation play out. I'd just be curious what other folks might think about that.
That's a good point. I mean, everybody is a journalist, really. I mean, it comes from telling stories. Everybody tells stories. Your grandmother's on Facebook reporting things, and she's got a news feed as well. But, then you get into the question of practicing formal journalism versus informal journalism, and that's one way to draw the line. I don't think it's a legal way to draw the line, though, because then you have things like the Greenwald situation you're mentioning, or the guy who's Greenwald's partner going to Brazil and getting arrested. Does he have legal protections or not if he's carrying a USB drive? So it's a fascinating question, and it's unfolding as we speak.
And some of it is just sort of like professional rivalry. Even 30 years ago, the TV guys were never big fans of the print guys. The print guys weren't very big fans of the TV guys. The radio guys, the alternative press guys didn't have anything good to say about the daily guys. The daily guys didn't have anything good to say about the alternative press. Well, now, you've got bloggers, you've got tweeters, you've got people on Facebook. So you're seeing, I think, sort of people's natural, they get their back up when someone they feel is encroaching on their turf. Well, that's just happening all the time now, and I think in many ways that's healthy. But you're just seeing a lot of that conversation play out where you wouldn't. The conversation used to happen 40 years ago at a bar late at night, and now it's happening in front of the entire planet. So.
Hello, I actually have two questions, if that's okay. Sure. So my first question is kind of related to technology and business. So I think, as we know, there's a lot of aggregator apps. There's a lot of reader list apps out there. So for example, like Flipboard, Summly, Pulse, and these apps, they all have I think they have partnership with sources. But when you click on those articles, they don't actually drive the traffic to the source itself. Sometimes they ingest the articles into their app. And so I'm wondering, from a source provider perspective, does that actually affect the ecosystem? Is there any tensions there, since they don't actually drive the traffic to your digital sites?
Yes, they're lampreys, and we were so gung-ho for traffic and being with the next thing. We missed out on blogs. We want to be with it with Flipboard, so we sold ourselves down the river with those. Early examples, the PI, when you were still there, signed a deal with MSN, right? To distribute and aggregate local news content, and look what happened to the PI.
Yeah, there are examples. I like to say there are good aggregation services and there are bad aggregation services, and it depends which ones you're playing with in order to make it work for you or not. An aggregator in our space that we cover a lot, TechMeme, for example. It's really page one of the tech industry, and I think it does a fabulous job, and I'm on it continuously throughout the day, and that, to me, that's good aggregation. They're putting the headline up there. It's a very, very short synopsis, and it does drive traffic back to the original source. That's good. Flipboard, where it's ingesting everything and it's stripping out the ads, not so good, not so good. And there are other examples of that. We have our own syndication partnerships as well. We're partnered with NBC News as an example, King 5 as another one. And, those are good partnerships for us, and we like those, and they're aggregating and taking our content. So I think it just depends what the source is in that case. But as I said, there are good aggregation sources and bad aggregation sources.
So actually, my second question is more related to how technology influenced the way we write articles. So I think probably most of the people in this room knows that New York Times published this article called Snowfall a few months ago, and it was fully interactive. Yes, and I think last week they published another one that's related to South Sea crisis the South China Sea crisis. And within those article pages, there's a lot of interactive elements, there's video, there's even sound. And I'm just wondering, from a writer's perspective, do you guys actually like to be participated in the design of how the article is being laid out, or how does that affect, how does these technologies actually affect the way you write?
Well, I mean, just personally speaking, I love that. I mean, that's one of the things I love about being an online journalist, is that I do think the platform allows itself and opens it up to these very, very compelling and interesting means for telling a story. And I think Snowfall was a fabulous example of that. I love that story. I love how they put it together and packaged it. So absolutely. And I would like to see us even do more of it. I mean, as I said, we're a lean and mean startup ourselves, so we can't do something on that level on every day. But we try to incorporate video into what we do. We try to incorporate social media into the stories that we do, and we like to have fun and stir it up in terms of the types of storytelling we do. I mean, writing in a different voice, writing with some opinion on occasion, and then playing it straight on a news story. And we just like to have fun with that and mix it up, and I think that's good. It's good for us as journalists, and I think it's good for the community too, because you get more of a diverse set of experiences and a diverse type of experience that you get to experience as a reader, and I like that.
Snowfall is really the epitome of telling a story, and that's our job as a journalist, is to tell a story. And the way Snowfall created this great representation using so many different elements to really tell that story in a lot of ways. But there are a lot of ways that, I mean, most of us probably cannot go out there and do Snowfall ourselves. There's no way I could on Forbes. I'm sure none of us could do that. But there's a lot of ways that, I mean, if any of you are writers or looking for ways to create your own stories, you can integrate ways that you can tell a story without just writing words. You can integrate tweets. You can use storyboard. There's a lot of ways that you can find elements to incorporate into your writing that make it so it's not just words, but actually kind of show your story as you're going. And if you're a writer, if you're a storyteller, I would highly recommend finding ways to do that.
Well, look back 15 years ago or so, and the promise of being able to put your news online. People envisioned Snowfall back then. I think really, you can do all this more than just links. You can have all these things, video, and Snowfall was beautiful. It was sort of the epitome of that. But it took a long time to get the tools and everything, and the skills and the organizations to start producing that. Snowfall has kind of led the way. There have been a lot. That was the pinnacle. We did something similar with our ocean acidification project. You guys take a look at that. We had some Snowfall-esque treatment of that story, but I think it's early to say that's the future, because it's still so laborious to produce something like that. For our ocean acidification project, we actually used a grant that assisted us with that. And to produce a story like that, you're talking about the cost of several new cars to do that, and that's just not something that's going to happen day in and day out. So they will be the rare unicorn when you see those. They're worth chasing them if you see one. Hopefully we'll do more, but we'll see what happens.
And that's just one thing I would want to just add to as well. The Snowfall, those things are phenomenal, and news organizations that can make video on a profitable scale, more power to you. But there's I think universities and other news organizations see things like Snowfall and the video that the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal is doing and say, oh, this is the future of online journalism. We need to get all of our students doing this. We need to get let's get a section of our newspaper doing that. When, if you talk to regional newspapers that don't have the audience that the New York Times does, the video is like, you cannot get it to scale. It is, the ROI is horrible. And I think when we talk about improving what we're doing with online journalism, 90% of what we do, if not more, is writing. And how are we going to improve upon that? And how are the stories we're telling with writing? How can we make those better?
We've got time for one more question.
Hi. I was just kind of curious what you guys all thought about Jeff Bezos buying Washington Post, and what the kind of current prevailing thought is on the evolving business model of journalism. Has there ever been any consideration to kind of an ad-free model where you can pay to have no ads Or, what are people saying? I'm kind of been out of the journalism world for a little while, so I'm curious about your thoughts.
I think every newsroom in the world was fascinated by that and is still scratching their head and waiting to see what he does. There's a lot of anticipation that, oh, maybe Jeff's going to show up with a magic bullet and show everybody how to do it. I don't know if that's true or not. It kind of depends on whether you think he's going into it to save journalism or save the Washington Post, or whether there's some other interests that he might have in that deal. The Washington Post in particular has ancillary benefits to the owner. So we'll have to see what happens. It's very exciting, though, to have somebody who has made it work and transformed other industries. So it's really still wait and see. There's people are saying now that, oh, billionaires are buying up newspapers. I think it's still awfully early to say there's a trend story there, although we are seeing several of these older public newspapers shifting to private ownership under rich guys. I still think it's early to say, but everybody's fascinated. Everybody's kind of on their edge of their seat waiting to see what he does, even though it's probably going to take 3 or 4 years before we really see what he's up to.
I think it's phenomenal. I wish you would have bought local and bought Seattle Weekly a year ago. But anytime you have somebody who doesn't have to turn a profit right now running a newspaper and is willing to spend money to experiment on things, it could be a few years. Maybe it will work, maybe it won't work. But that's what the industry needs more than ever right now, is somebody who's willing to experiment and is willing to lose money doing it.
Yeah, I agree with Brier and Chris on that. Definitely very interesting to watch. I think there are two camps here. And I've written about this. Which Jeff Bezos bought the Washington Post? Is it this guy who runs a very, very streamlined, frugal business and is really out to run a business? Is he going to apply those skills to running the Post? Or is it the Jeff Bezos who is, retrieving Apollo 11 rockets off the ocean floor? And I use that as an example of, is it more of a vanity investment? My gut tells me, I think, it's more of a vanity investment, but we'll see. I think the jury's out. To your second question, have we thought about stripping out the ads and offering that as a service? We actually have talked about that at some point. We have a membership program at GeekWire where this is something that we have discussed. There are no immediate plans, so don't tweet that we're getting rid of the ads and sponsorships on GeekWire. But it is the type of thing that we have talked about that we could layer into a membership service, or if people just wanted it.
I don't think the ads will go away, though. You sign up for cable TV, you think, oh, I'm getting premium TV. There won't be ads, but there are still ads even in the premium tier.
I just think we're doing ads wrong right now. I think the way that newspapers are buying up ads, I think the way they're delivering ads, I think the way they're serving ads, they're doing them wrong. And until they start really understanding targeting ads, buying the right ads, serving the right ads to the right demographic, until that's really nailed down, and especially on mobile, they just won't work.
Okay, I want to thank our panelists, Kelly, Brier, Chris, and John, and thank you all for attending.